Oh, you're here. Excellent. Let's get cracking. Hey, welcome back. Today's video is how to make a Gudetama cake with a sort of hidden inside piñata egg center. But if you haven't seen it, then just look it up on YouTube. They have lots of videos, and it's just kind of like this really short videos of this like lazy egg that just does stuff. It doesn't sound that good, but it's really funny. Anyway, let's get started. So first you'll need some egg candies to go inside. The tiny ones I got from IKEA's pick and mix candy section, and the medium sized ones I got just from like an English candy store, and the biggest ones I just poached out of a Haribo Star Mix bag. So to start assembling, you'll need a cake with at least 3 layers, and I used 4 for mine, and you'll also need a big batch of buttercream frosting. Start by spreading a little frosting on a plate or cake board, and then place down your first layer of cake and spread just a little frosting around the edges. And then before you add the middle layer or layers, cut a hole out of the center with a cookie cutter or a knife. Then add this layer, and if you have more than one layer, add frosting in between. And before you add the top layer, don't forget to fill the cake with your extraordinary egg candies. Then pop the last layer on and cover the whole thing with a thin crumb coat of frosting. Pop this in the fridge to harden, and while that's in the fridge, dye the rest of the frosting sort of like a egg yolky yellow colour. And once the first layer is firm, spread on the yellow layer as neatly as possible. And then just chuck it back in the fridge. And while that's hardening, make a white chocolate ganache, and I showed how to do this in my last video, so I'll just leave a link to that in the description box below, though I did add some white food dye to this one. Once the final layer of frosting is hardened and your ganache has cooled down a little bit, pour it over the top of the cake and use a spatula to move it towards the edges. And don't add too much at first, because you can always add more. So keep doing this until the ganache just about reaches the edges, and then use a spatula to pull little bits of ganache over the edge to look like drips. So if you want this to look very perfect and exact, I'd suggest using a piping bag to make it neater, but because I kind of want this to have that fried egg, sort of just cracked open look, I don't really mind it being messy, but it's up to you. And once you're happy with how that looks, chuck it back in the fridge. And while it's in the fridge, it's time to make fondant decorations. And just for a reference, this is kind of what I'm going for. I want the top of the cake to look like the plate that the sort of Gudetama egg thing sits on. So for this, you'll need a little bit of green fondant and then big bits of red, white, and yellow fondant. First, take half of the red fondant and roll it into 3 bowls. Then roll out the green fondant and cut out sort of starfishy shapes, kind of like stars but sort of longer and thinner prong things, and you can have more than 5 prongs. And then just attach these with a little bit of water. Then take the white fondant and roll that to about 1/2 centimeter thickness. And place your yellow blob of fondant on top, just roughly how big you want the Gudetama yolk thing to be, and just kind of use that as a size reference. Then cut around that to look like a fried egg. Then just smooth down the edges to make that look a bit more natural. Then to make the bacon rashers, take the leftover red fondant and the leftover white fondant and take half from each and combine them to make like a pink color so that you have red, pink and white. So then roll up the three colors and sort of just stretch and fold until you have this sort of vertical marble look. Then roll this out and cut out two sort of slightly squiggly rectangles to look like two bacon rashers. And then take your fondant cutter and cut little grooves into them. And then put some icing sugar over the top and wipe it away, and it should stay in the grooves to leave sort of like a bacony texture. And then lastly, and with most difficulty, it's time to make the Gudetama yolk. Roll out the yellow fondant to look sort of like a beanie oval shape, and then roll little tubes of fondant into arms and legs and stick them on. And use a little bit of water if you need to. And for the top arm and leg, you want to flatten the fondant in a bit where it's going to attach, and then just smooth that out until it looks like the shape that you want. And finally, draw a little face on with some black food dye. And I'm not great at little details, so please excuse how messy that little bit is. And then you just want to chuck your decorations on top and you're pretty much done. And this is what it looks like when it's finished. So full disclosure, the whole piñata aspect of this cake didn't turn out as well as I'd hoped. I've made a heap of these cakes before, but I've never made them with gummies in the center before, and it was really hard to get the knife to go through them, and so the cake didn't cut very well. So the gummies didn't pour out as well as M&Ms or Skittles would have, though if you had a super fancy sharp knife, this probably wouldn't be an issue. But I think it still worked out great, so omelette that slide. And plus, as you can see, I just used a fork to encourage the lollies to come out, and just added a few more to make it look really cool. And it's up to you, I'm just letting you know in case you're really set on the sort of candy flowing out look, and if that's the case, then I would try and find some little chocolate or sort of hard candy eggs, if they exist even. Anyway, that's the end of the video. I hope you like it and you give it a go. I'm sure anyone that you make it for will be totally shell-shocked and excited to receive it. You might even say they'd be scrambling to try some. And by the way, if anyone's wondering where I got this totally cute egg accessory from, I stitched a Haribo lolly onto a piece of ribbon. It's just a Haribo. Please subscribe.